morning, everyone. Hope everyone is well rested from last night, and thank you for attending my panel, or my talk. Clearly, if I think this is a panel, maybe I'm not as rested as you guys are. But without further ado, it's good to see everybody here. So I'm from Colibri Games, as mentioned. We were previously Fluffy Fairy Games. We rebranded about 2 months ago. If you have questions about rebranding processes, I can answer those later as well. I'm happy to talk to you about that. It's more complicated than it seems. And today we're going to talk about under the hood of a successful idle game. I'm going to go into the processes of how we make our games, how we make our decisions for these games, how we decide which games to make, and finally, we're going to talk about how we do live ops. So we have a specific approach to how we're doing this, and I know that for a lot of people, it's sort of like a big, terrifying concept, and we're happy to break it down into something slightly more manageable. Just before we get started, I'd like to see from the audience, who here are game developers themselves? Hands, cool. And who here is from a game development company that is currently doing live ops in some shape or form? Cool, okay. Yeah, this thing, that's how I feel sometimes. It's sort of, we do it somehow. So it's good to have you all here. Great, so this is us. We were founded about 2 years ago in a town called Karlsruhe, which is just south of Frankfurt. We were founded by 4 guys in a student apartment, just 4, who made the first version of our game. It blew up in a good way. We moved to Berlin. Now we're about 90 people with 2 teams and a central publishing organization that handles things like marketing, things like analytics, and a couple other functions. Okay, cool. So our 2 games are Idle Miner Tycoon and Idle Factory Tycoon. Idle Miner Tycoon was the first game. It's an idle game. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with the mechanics behind idle games, so I'll just kind of go over them really briefly, so we're all talking about the same thing. Idle games are mid-core games, so they're not really casual, but they're mid-core, and they sit right in between casual games and hardcore games. And the reason they sit there is that they're very easy to start playing, but they actually attract incredibly hardcore audiences who like to spend their time min-maxing all of the various attributes of the managers in the games, of all of the upgrades and things like that. An idle game is a game that essentially plays itself while you're not playing it. So you open the game, you play for a few minutes, you leave the game, and when you return, you've progressed further in the game. And this is super important because in an idle game, you cannot lose. It's not like any other game. You have to keep winning, and the progression needs to be exponential. And we believe in idle as a philosophy to game making, not just a bolt-on genre. And this is important to us in the process of how we're making the games. So it's worked out so far. We have 50 million plus installs, 2 million daily active users, 10 million monthly active users, and growing. So we'll talk a little bit about our approach to how we're building these. Firstly, we want to contrast ourselves to some of the bigger players out there. At 90 people with 25 to 30 person game teams, we don't have the opportunity to build these huge multi-year-long projects. And I'm sure most of the experiences that you've had are similarly mirrored in this, right? So we need to figure out what works in the game, what doesn't work, and stop working on games that aren't going to be successful. Our first project that we released was Idle Miner Tycoon. But the first project we worked on was an overly complex take on how to make a Clash of Clans style multiplayer game on mobile. We got about 60% of the way through that, took several months, and realized that it was never going to work, and we needed to abandon the project altogether. So we've been there, we've put in the emotional labor and the real labor in order to make these games and failed. And that's not a mistake that we want to make again. It's not a mistake that we think that you guys should do either. So instead, we've adapted this process behind our game. So we start with a very small concept and a very small team, just a few folks. And in about 8 weeks, we can create a minimum viable product. Most people here are familiar with the MVP. And we try to set this up so that we're building it and we're iterating on the project as fast as possible. We just want something where we can test out the game design, the core concepts, and make sure it's fun. And this is something where we're doing internal testing. Everybody is playing. You're not going to get any valuable metrics at this stage. There's nothing, like even player times, none of this will make any sense. It's just about getting the core feel of it. That takes about 8 weeks. And this is sort of what the evolution of our MVP looks like, right? So the very first version of the game is extremely basic. It's mechanics. There's no graphics. We slowly add rough concepts. Now, we sort of cheated here because a lot of this is borrowed from the previous game. So this is Idle Factory Tycoon, our second title. Our first title has very similar UX, very similar process within the game. But nonetheless, within 8 weeks, we're able to get to the third screen. We're iterating on the graphics. We're testing the gameplay mechanics. And we start adjusting the balancing. Finally, of course, you're going to be finalizing the UX. And you add animations, all the pretty stuff that's related to look and feel. And the way to get there, the most important thing is by saying no to everything else. When we started, we made the mistake of trying to add in all of these cool analytics tools, right? Like 3 or 4, because they're going to tell us everything we need to know about how our players are operating. We tried to add in other monetization tools or new features or things like this that are going to overcomplicate things. And that's the worst thing you can do, because it's just going to distract you from the singular focus of building a great game. So that means there's no cloud save. There's no social features. There's no localization. We just make the games in English. There's no in-app purchases. In fact, in our first game, we didn't have in-app purchases for the first 9 months until users started requesting ways to spend money in the game, and that's when we added them. We have no ad mediation. We just use Unity. We make our games in Unity. We can monetize through ads initially in Unity. And there's no long-term motivation. If our game has a 70% day 1 retention, its day 30 retention in the initial stages is 0. There's no reason to come back after 3 or 4 days. But that's fine. That can be added later. Okay, so we've gone through this process. We fixed the bugs. It's a fun game, we think. And now we begin external testing. And for external testing, we start out very slow. So since we're lucky enough to already have a base of players that play our current games, we go to individual players that contribute on our social media, on our Facebook, on Discord, on Reddit. And we ask them through accounts that do not appear to be associated with our company, right? So we don't want to come in with something that says, you know, Colibri Games guy 211 wants to know if you want to play a brand new game. We use an alternate account, and we ask people if they want to beta test our game. Once they get into our groups and they see that everybody is from the same company, they realize who the creators are, and they begin testing. At this stage, we're looking for ratings and user feedback. So we start releasing the game in select markets, Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, countries where they speak English, countries where the retention profiles are roughly similar to what we see in the US. And we begin by seeing what the organic download rate is, what the retention from these organics is. And the reason it's so important is that we measure everything by day 1 retention. So I mentioned earlier, this is the most important thing. And the reason being is that we want to make games that are fun. With a small team, we can intuit if a game is fun. I can feel if a game is fun. I can't feel if a game is going to have a 1% increase in monetization. That's next to impossible. But I can feel if it's fun, and we can make the game more fun. So we want the games, of course, in the first 2 minutes, 3 minutes to be the most fun possible, because that's all the time we're going to have with our players, if we think hard about their attention spans, mine included. Okay, so we've tested externally. Now we're going to begin scaling up. This is when we begin adding team members, we build more features, and this goes on forever and ever and ever until there are no more iPhones produced or Android devices. All right, and it's important to note here that we do this all with weekly updates. So starting in July 2016, we had 90 updates in 2 years. So this is a few months old because we still do an update every week, and this is our games as a service concept. It works with the preceding week The game designers are coming up with the ideas. This allows them to prep the artists. And the main goal of how we work is to not put any roadblocks in front of the developers. So when an engineer is ready to begin working, we need it so that he can just grab assets from Dropbox and not have to ask where they are and not use temp graphics. Because at the same time that he's building this, the testers have to begin testing on that particular product. So our plan is basically we have the game designers working ahead of everybody else. The game artists are prepping assets for new features. We begin our sprint with the developer team, not blocked by anyone. And simultaneously, QA is testing these things. This is how we have 1-week sprints, focusing on the fastest thing we can build in that week. So here's sort of a diagram of our continuous integration process and a few of the different tools that we're using in order to do this. And I think the most important thing from here is that we've built the process to be more or less automated, so we can use that using Jenkins to automatically push these test versions to our test devices so that nobody is waiting and that nobody is sitting there playing half DevOps and half developer. As much automation as possible. Okay, and then once the version is ready to ship, we begin a staged rollout. You can actually do this now on iOS for people who are not doing the automatic updates for the manual updates, for the automatic updates, but not for manual updaters. And so in the beginning, we're just identifying bugs via the reporting tool. That continues until day 3. So we don't take any of the feedback between 1 and 5%. It's irrelevant and it's noise. But once it hits about 20%, we're looking at the ratings and we're looking at user feedback. And at this point, we allow ourselves the option to stop the rollout. And we also take a moment at 99% Android rollout to make sure that there's no critical bugs, in which case, if there were, we would kill the rollout. All right, so scaling this, as I mentioned, we're using continuous iteration. So on the left, you can see the initial version of our game, and this is the same mine on the right. It looks considerably prettier. So here's where we get to the sort of the live ops-ish part of this. So for us, we want to make sure in our games, which is a game that's about mining things, right? So first you mine, in our game, first you mine coal, then you mine gold, then you mine silver. We want to have things that people can continuously mine. Unfortunately, you run out of materials that you can mine, right? So there's only so many people that want to mine bauxite or iron before it gets a little repetitive. So in order to keep people entertained, we add kind of fun, fictional things you could mine. Let's say you mine candy or you mine cheese or things like that. And we do these in one, usually like weekend-long sessions, and we call them event mines. And so sort of the way that we do this is that initially, basically, we preload all of these event mines. We started with one, and we preload them on the user's device. And then we use a Microsoft service called PlayFab to activate these preloaded mines on the user's device once the time hits. We had some trouble when we first started doing this. For instance, we accidentally shipped a developer version of our game to our players in some countries. And we realized this once they started playing our event mines before they were supposed to ship, which was a problem. So this is not without hiccups. But for the most part now, we're preloading 5 or 6 of these events in advance and then activating once the time is right. So this is sort of our I guess, lean way of doing the live ops for this. And likewise, it's the same with our sales. So we have a game designer who is working every month, twice a month, to update the sales, to craft the sales, to create new items to sell, new packages, and measuring these packages and items in our analytics to see what's the most successful configuration or combination of these. And so this is also something that we're preloading. And finally, it's important as we're in the development process to be player-centric. And the reason being is that we want our goal actually is to be the #1 player-driven games company in the world. We want to be like the Supercell of idle games. So to do this, we have to connect to our players through a huge number of channels. We connect to them through mail. We answer every email. To Facebook, we try to answer all of our Facebook posts and all of the direct messages. On Reddit and on Discord, we employ, I think, like 7 full-time community managers in order to do this. And the reason being is that we want to take the ego out of our game development process and really hand over the process to our players so we can integrate their feedback and make the best game that they want. And for this, we're optimizing on the user satisfaction, on rating, on the star ratings, number of ratings, and kind of the qualitative ratings, the descriptions people are using. And basically our process is that once a week we have a community management meeting that's led by our community managers where they have collected all of the feedback from our players, and then they categorize or code it into what people are actually asking for. And so we use this to direct the development process. So, of course, no player is ever going to ask for a new ad network, but they might ask for more ads in their region. Or they might say, okay, I want more social features, and like, wouldn't it be cool if I could start my own company or something, and maybe this is too complicated, or it wouldn't work for other reasons. But we can adapt that feedback and figure out the best way to answer it according to what we can actually build and what would work in our game. And then we use this to kind of lead ourselves forward. So that's the conclusion of how we do our game development and how to make a successful idle game. I can turn it over to you guys now if you have any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nate, for your great presentation. So, guys, if any of you has a question, yeah, feel free to ask. So I think we'll start from the closer one.
Thank you. It was a great presentation. I wanted to ask how much, maybe in the percentage, of the ideas that you put into the game you get from your players, from your player fan base?
So I think directly from the fan base, it's probably something like, let's see, we can go back. It's probably something like 50% or so, maybe 60. I guess it's harder since there are things like they want different skins and skins for managers, like say for an instance in this example, and we would interpret that as, okay, we just need different managers. So for instance, when we started, we had a single type of manager, and it was like a sort of like a light manager, right? It was like you only did one thing. It just made your users, your players, your miners work. And then we said, okay, let's add a new type of manager, which would be a executive level manager. Okay, so he has a different skin. He has like a nice suit on. And then people are like, okay, we want more skins, so we added super managers that are even better than all of the executive managers. And we're like, okay, well, what's something that's missing? It's like, oh, well, all of our managers are dudes, so why don't we try and get a little bit more representation of the managers? So we added another skin, which would be female managers. So in this sense, yeah, we added all of this stuff, and it sort of adheres. It might not be what the players think they want, which would be like, you know, like a customization tool for the super managers, but is sort of in line with what they're asking for. So I'd say like roughly maybe 50% based on kind of that process.
Okay, so it's like you're even mining their ideas into something, refining it, yeah?
Exactly, because like the players want things, and they don't necessarily know how long or how hard it takes to build something. And the other thing that's part of our process is that we want things that are going to have an impact, like an immediate large impact in our game. So like a manager customization tool, for instance, I'm just picking on this, but that might not actually impact the player experience. It might just satisfy like 2% of really loud players. But if we had a super manager, say for instance, we can sell the super manager for higher amounts. We can do all sorts of, I guess, yeah, we can kind of play with it a little bit more. So you're absolutely right. We're basically refining their ideas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, thanks for the presentation. I know your game, it's awesome. I'm I'm too doing idle game, and I analyze Idle Miner Tycoon a lot, and this is a really great game. And I have a few questions. The first one, can you tell us how much is the percent of buyers in your game?
Sure. So our purchasers are, like many casual games, it's pretty low, right? So it'll be like 2 to 3%. Since I get this question all the time, we're monetizing 50-50 between ads and IAP. And we really built the game, I think, or we developed it in mind with how to maximize the amount of the number of times that users will watch ads, which works really, really well in an idle game. Because an idle game is all about, it's kind of controlling two levers. It's controlling time, so how long it takes to build something, how long it takes to get a payout, and also the payouts themselves. How much money am I making from my mine? Likewise, how much does something cost? So with that, two things, it's really easy to manipulate via ads, speed it up, pay it out, that sort of a thing. With IAPs, I think because we have such a casual audience in there that sort of bolsters our numbers, it just doesn't convert necessarily as well. I'm sorry, what was your second question?
Yeah, and second one, in the beginning, why did you choose to make Idle mobile game?
Sure. So we looked at, well, actually, basically we can thank Kongregate for this. So they put out a spreadsheet that was from Adventure Capitalists, and they said, okay, we believe in idle games. Here's all of the math done for you. And he said, okay, well, that's one thing we can check off. Also, because you can't lose, it's a simulation game, it's fairly easy to do. There were a few good examples of how to make these games. We went for it. Also, the reason we picked a mine, originally we were going to do a business simulator, right, like in a tower or something, but there were a bunch of competitors that were doing that, so we said, all right, well, the form factor of a phone makes it really easy to scroll up or down, so if we can't go up, then we have to go down, and what would go down? Oh, it would be a mine, I guess, so we'll just try mine. Yeah, that's our thought process. We've moved the curtain back, now you know.
Hello. I have another question. Very great speech, thanks. I am also Kongregate fan of idle games, so I would like to ask 2 questions. First is, how were you managed to move from 4 team members to 19? It was difficult. How you express?
Sure. So the original game, as you kind of saw with the example with the MVP, was just like programmer art. So with the original 4, we were just, I was not part of the founding team, but the founders basically wanted to just kind of like borrow assets from where they could. They had like student interns who were making a few of these here and there, but they weren't full-time members. And then basically over time, you just kind of add people to solve problems. So if you need art constantly, then the first person you're going to hire is an artist. Starting at around maybe 20 people or so, that's when you need to solve specific problems like marketing problems. At around maybe 50 people to 60 people, we started having more like corporate problems. Like, okay, we need somebody to do HR for us. We need somebody to do like finance and accounting because our accounting system is a shoebox of loose receipts, and that's probably not good. So like, it's just the first problem we're trying to solve is making money as a company, and then once that's stabilized, then you can do the other headaches.
Okay, then another question. You said that the game is exponential. How do you calculate the exponential factor?
Giant spreadsheets. So we have kind of a basic setup for the initial like few levels that doesn't change because we don't want to break the way that players are entering the game. And then for everything else, like after that and all the event mines, we just use kind of these more or less elaborate spreadsheets that are telling us for every level, what does something cost? And then you can kind of like set on the side, all right, let's say somebody is at this level or they have this upgrade or this boost. What is everything going to cost? How quickly will they get paid out? And what can they buy? And then we just kind of test out to see where the pain points are going to be like, oh, okay, if they have everything here filled up and they have this boost. Oh, it's going to take 10 years in order to advance to get enough money in order to buy the next stage. So we need to make these things cheaper. It's a lot of trial and error, and a lot more art than science in certain ways. Because I don't think there's any perfect idle curve. It's mostly just from the feel of it. So you're just kind of testing the things. But you can create a skeleton for how it's sort of supposed to look.
So thank you very much, Nate, for your great presentation. I'm actually a player myself. Yeah, I play the Idle Miner Tycoon. So it's great to have a deeper understanding on how it works.
And I just want to add, if you are making an idle game and you're looking for a publisher, we are publishing idle games. So please find me afterwards, and I'd be happy to talk to you about it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Have a good day.